Hey guys, Braden back again this week with Spring Fever Custom Calls. The last couple of weeks we've been talking about, how to get the most out of your pot call, how to get the most out of your box call. We talked about mouth call differences. And with seasons starting to open up around the country, let's get into actually talking about trying to kill some turkeys. Transferring yourself from turkey hunter to turkey killer, there's a couple things that we need to focus on. And today's episode is going to focus on adding realism to your calling. I think this is a very important, and this took me a long time to actually figure out on my own. I was, before season and things like that, I was practicing my calls and, I could call fairly decent. But when I was going to the woods and, not being as successful as what I wanted to, I really tried to figure out and think, intentionally what am I doing that's causing me not to kill these birds? And I finally came to the conclusion that, I wasn't sounding like a real live turkey. Even though my calling sounded like a turkey, just my behavior, the atmosphere, the environment that turkeys live in, I wasn't replicating that. And that's something I want to talk to you guys about tonight. When we look at adding realism to our calling, there's a lot of things that we need to take into account. One, the first thing I want to talk to you about is you have to be able to think about every scenario that you're in. There's all kinds of videos out there. Matt Dale's done several on reading a gobbler's attitude, reading his behavior. You have to take that scenario into circumstance and figure out how to make that scenario the most realistic to coax that bird into feeling comfortable, to bring him into your setup. The next thing is adding effects to your calling to make it sound more realistic. Now, as I said earlier, we can be a world champion caller, but there are some other things that we can do to make that scenario more realistic, to make him feel comfortable. I've talked about doing a fly down cackle in previous videos last year, and I had mentioned taking my hat off, flopping it on the side or beating it on the side of your leg to make it sound like that bird's flying down. Now, I also stated in that video that's not going to work every single time, but every now and then that does give it just that little bit extra to seem more realistic, more lifelike. It might, change his mind and get him to fly into your setup. It's small things like that. You're not actually making turkey vocalizations there. I mean, you are if you're doing a fly down cackle, but you're also adding the beating of the wings and making it sound like he's flying. It's different than just, cutting a bunch on a mouth call or a pot call or whatever. You're adding that flapping to make it sound more like a turkey, making it more realistic. So I know for a fact that has helped me kill tons of birds. Last year alone, there's the video during the youth hunt. I did a fly down, and there's nobody will ever change my mind that turkey flew down and we killed that bird. You can see in the video it was right off the roost. That played a huge part into that. Hunting with Tyler last year and the year before, that fly down cackle definitely brought birds into gun range for him. I've done it several times with Dad. I mean, I've witnessed them flying out of a tree and beeline right to that setup after a fly down. Small things like that can change you from turkey hunter to turkey killer, and maybe the difference of you punching a tag or not. Another thing that adds realism to your setup is scratching in the leaves. Turkeys wander around all day long and peck at the ground, scratching the grass, scratching the leaves, and they're actually pretty loud creatures. I mean, that's one of the beauties about turkey hunting. You don't have to be extremely quiet. They're loud animals. I mean, when they walk, they sound like a herd of elephants coming through there. You know, don't be afraid to be aggressive in terms of adding those realistic, scratches in the leaves, pollen at leaves. In last year's episode with Tyler, I had scratched out leaves. That morning we actually called in 3 longbeards, but on the first one, I had been scratching in the leaves, and I'd scratched all the leaves out of my hand's reach, trying to get the first one to come in, and that bird did come in. He just happened to come into an area where Tyler couldn't shoot. The second one that came in, since I was out of leaves with my hands, I took my feet and I started raking leaves with my feet. And as soon as I done that, that bird, I wish I had it on camera, as soon as he heard that, he bolted inside the timber and gave Tyler a 30-yard shot. So I had called to him multiple times, and he was standing there and he was gobbling, he was strutting, but he wasn't committing to where he could get a shot. It wasn't until I raked those leaves and I added just that one little final touch of realism that triggered something in his brain that made him come into that woods line and offer a shot. So that's another scenario, is adding, just the scratching, the pawing in the leaves. But again, it also plays into effect the scenario that you're in, in thinking about what turkeys would be doing. Another thing is, this is a big one. This is huge to me, and I think people fall into a trance almost, but they're like it's on repeat. When they're calling to a bird, their calling sequences are repeated over and over and over and over. If they yelp the same amount of yelps in every sequence. If it's 4 notes, they do 4 notes every single time, maybe 5, okay? But I think callers get used to, doing that same call, and it becomes repetitious, and it's really just not lifelike. If you're going to be realistic and add realism to your calling, you've got to be able to, as a hunter, think about a turkey language and add a variety of different calling sequences and different calls at that gobbler to make it sound more realistic. A hen's not just going to sit there and yelp in a 5-note yelp over and over and over and over and be at the same tone. There's several times, if we're hunting public land or maybe we're hunting close to a property line on private, after listening to a call, over and over and over again, we can look, whoever I'm hunting with, whether it's Dad or EP or Tyler, you can pretty much say, yep, that's a hunter, because it's the same thing. It's just repetitious. It's just on repeat mode. Realistically, turkeys don't do that in the wild. I mean, they're constantly changing. There's whines, there's whistles, there's kikis, there's clucks, there's putts. There are yelps, there's purring. There's so many different calls out there that turkeys make that a lot of times that we don't hear. Now, we hear the gobble, right? But think about the jakes, think about the gobblers. They yelp. There's jake yelps, there's gobbler yelps. They purr, they cluck as well. They gobble. Jakes don't gobble very well. There's so many different vocalizations that we can use, put those in our bag of tricks to be able to use to add realism to the scenario. And, if you watch some of these guys on YouTube that are great callers, they are calling and they're using a bunch of different tones, they're using a bunch of different pitches, and they're using different vocalizations. They're not just yelping, they're not just, clucking. Sure, that stuff does work, and it's great. And don't get me wrong, every time I go out, I'm doing that stuff, but I'm also switching my calls up to make it not sound like I'm just on repeat mode. Read the scenario. If it's an early season hunt where they're all flocked up and they're still in those big groups and they're just starting to bust up, use some of those fall tactics, fall calls, kikis, things like that, because they're still wanting to stay in a big flock of birds. They haven't really busted into smaller groups yet. You have to think about the situation, think about the calls that you're using, but switch it up. And that's the last tip I'm going to leave you with on adding realism, is try to learn new vocals for turkey calls. Look some up, try to figure out something new, learn something new, but we've got to be able to read the scenario and then add realism to that scenario to make him feel comfortable, to bring him in, get inside his bubble, bring him into our setup, and offer us a shot. That's the ultimate chess game that we're trying to solve. And I truly do believe that adding realism will increase your success rate. It's just something that we've got to learn to do. And hopefully, you guys will start thinking about this. And like I said, I know seasons are opening up around the country, and we're starting to think, our brains are starting to turn and focus more on turkeys right now. And, think about it. Driving down the highway, I think about weird stuff like that all the time. But I'm always trying to think, what can I do if this happens, or if this happens? What if I done this? You've got to train your brain to start thinking like a turkey, behave like a turkey, and add that realism to our setup. Okay. Hopefully you guys learned something this week. We'll be right back here next week. We're excited. This week's the week we leave for South Dakota, so we've got a lot of action planned. We're getting ready to start our tour here around the Midwest. So stay tuned. We've got a lot of turkey hunting action coming to you guys. Good luck this spring. We'll see you guys next week.